Well, thank you for having me as usual. It's always a pleasure. I say that with great sincerity. My name is Lewis Black. I'm the president, CEO, and founder of Almonty Industries. And for our sins, we are the kings of tungsten. What is Almonty? Well, I mean, I think a lot of people who have watched this before and have been long-term shareholders, you're very familiar with who we are. I think that since our last presentation on this forum, we have made continually better strides. Stock prices starting to perform despite the best efforts of one group who still seem to be upset about our acquisition of Samdong. And I think we've made good progress in Portugal, which I'll discuss a little bit later. We've made good progress in Korea. I've just returned from there. And we've also made good progress in the downstream. I think that we don't really need to spend an awful lot of time on the high level of Almonty. I think the share ownership has remained consistent. Our debt actually has reduced, which will be out in our next audit. We had a significant conversion of equity of debt into equity already at 90 cents. And that was approximately, I think it was 9 million, 10 million Canadian. So that's good. And I think we constantly now strive to, as we said last time, to clean up our balance sheet. We obviously operate in a number of different areas, Portugal being our primary asset currently. South Korea will then become our primary asset on opening, and Valtrashal, well, is at that stage of permitting, and as I think everyone is familiar, Spain and Portugal are not exactly rushing to issue permits, but it's one for the future. Geopolitics means that there are lots of changes underfoot, and Los Santos still remains idle at this time, but we're now in discussion with one of our off-takers to reactivate it. Tungsten price. Well, it's quite unique. It's remained at these high levels despite seeing many other commodity prices, especially in the technology sector, drop off a cliff. This is really being driven by two main factors. And if we really break it down, it's two main factors. One, there appears that China has indicated it's going to remove its import duty this year, which will almost certainly lead to the demise of total state subsidies of tungsten mines in China, meaning the price will ultimately then normalize. When I say normalize, a significant rise from this place, because that would be considered to be the normal market price. We've operated within a tight band of 250 to 350 for many, many years, almost a generation, because of these subsidies have allowed China to produce at a very reasonable cost on the basis of that. So as Western suppliers, we've always had to develop technologies to compete, which we've done. But it's come to a point, there's a new mine that a Chinese company, obviously assisted with the Chinese government, is opening in Kazakhstan. And the removal of this tariff makes a complete sense. Minmetals discussed it at the last conference in Japan at the International Tungsten Industry Association. So that's one reason. The other reason is defense. And whether we like it or not, tungsten has always been a war metal. When in the 50s and early 60s, tungsten was more valuable than gold, driven by defense. The Cold War came to an end. Inventories run down, capacity to produce munitions essentially was let slide, except from South Korea. South Korea, of course, kept the capacities, which is one of the reasons why South Korea has risen up the defense contractor manufacturing rankings. But defense has generated a unusually anxious geopolitical situation. EVs, of course, tungsten puts a fee in both sides, industry and technology. But ultimately, it's this defense tension that is really now putting a lot of pressure on the supply of tungsten. And as an example, and I know he'll be very upset that I even talk about this, one of my customers, because the customers always like to tell you how things are going so badly so they can pay you virtually no money for the material. Perhaps if you gave it to them free, they'd be more happy. But I was just recently with one of them who is a significant supplier of to DoD in the United States. And his order book for penetrators is now booked up for the next 3 years. And I think that pretty much sums up the outlook from a defense point of view. I appreciate that, no one really wants to address this in the sense that, is the world becoming a more dangerous place? I don't believe it is, but I do believe that everyone got caught with their pants down. The inventories got run down dramatically, and there is no capacity to replenish it at the same extent that they're being consumed. So you're going to see extraordinary defense spending, both in the EU, in Japan, in South Korea, Australia, the United States, even Canada. Everyone is now looking at refreshing their aging military approach. And I think this will have a dramatic effect, as well as the reduction of the Chinese tariffs, on the price and availability of tungsten. Then we get into the macro of Korea. It's hotting up the tungsten market. I mean, I've always said they use more tungsten per capita than anywhere else in the world. And if you think that you have the US, you have the EU, Japan, and South Korea, these are the 4 territories that consume tungsten. In the US, you have no domestic supply. In Japan, you have no domestic supply. In the EU, you have 2.5 mines to supply in the EU. And in Korea, you're about to have the world's largest tungsten mine. And what we're seeing is announcements of significant investment in a number of specialized downstream operations. The Xiamen Tungsten, China, has already arrived into South Korea to build a small oxide plant that can process scrap. IMC, who I think many of the long-term Wolf shareholders will be very familiar with, has announced a almost $100 million investment to build a new powder plant that is specifically targeting the raw material required for tungsten gas for semiconductors. It's ultimately, I'm seeing now real movement in Korea. And I think we are also in the same boat because of, as I said, I've just returned from Korea. We've already now entered the sort of mid-stage conversations with a particular group regarding their involvement with us in one guise or another. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that going forward. And certainly we are now, the pace of our downstream approach is now accelerating. I think that we've touched on a lot of this, but moly is another metal that is also seeing a price that has been pretty consistent over the last year and a half. And that's driven, strangely enough, not that there's a huge demand-supply disconnect, because demand has increased, because obviously a lot of it's used in steel, and that's in construction, and construction is obviously reduced across the world because of the current financial conditions, economic conditions. But because the traditional place of moly is a byproduct of copper production, and especially in open pit copper mines. And because of this drive towards ESG, a lot of these copper mines now are migrating to more underground works, because ultimately it's a lot less impactful environmentally. And that has affected the supply of moly. And I think that's a very unusual situation. And so far as I know, and I'm sure someone's going to tell me if I'm wrong, because I know people love to do that, is that there is no standalone moly mine that exists in the West currently. And I think what we're seeing in the conversations that we're having with a certain group regarding the entire company, but also about the moly, is that the moly deposit that we have is extremely high grade in the scheme of things. It's extremely cost effective to get in there because we're already there with our existing infrastructure, and it's a vast resource. So I think this is really going to come much more into play during this year in terms of adding to our value. You know, these are our 10 reasons. I think I'm going to go a little off the script here. Who are we? Well, Dan D'Amato is one of our board members and myself, been in business for nearly 20 years in tungsten. We were very successful in our first foray in the Panasqueira mine. We turned into a 40-bagger. We exited very successfully. And then just like the mafia, I got pulled right back in. And it was really to complete the job that we always set out that we wanted to do, which was ultimately to take what we considered to be viable long life mines, package it into a company with the ability to downstream, because back then and even now, there is no vertical smelter for tungsten oxide that exists outside of China or Vietnam in the transparent jurisdiction. There is, of course, there's one in Austria, but that's not for the market. That's obviously an in-house project, but it also has to feed concentrate from other sources. This would be a same source concentrate fed to a tungsten oxide plant. And I always believed that once we had achieved this milestone, we would have built something quite significant. And remember, the journey we've taken, we've done everything junior miners were not meant to be able to do. We were able to sell successfully a project and then reacquire it and still maintain a relationship with the seller. We were able to make further acquisitions from, essentially at the time, earnings from a mine that was making Los Santos made us, it built the base of what we worked on. We were able to acquire the world's largest tungsten mine from two very big hitters, both IMC and Dundee. How were we ever going to get in? We managed to do it. Then we said we were going to project finance this, traditional project finance. I said, you'll never do it. You're a junior. We did it. Every step we've done against the grain. And I think to all of the shareholders that are in us, including myself, we've stayed with this and we fought the good fight. Have we upset a lot of people on the way? Absolutely, because we've done something we weren't meant to be able to do. And if we can do it, anyone can do it. And that could affect a whole business model that exists between the more high yield guys who invest in these things. But we did it because we were diligent. Has it taken longer than we would have liked? No, not really. These things take time. Great businesses need a decade under their belt to really explode. We are now in a place where we are now seriously under construction in Korea. We are now accelerating the downstream. We are now in conversation with a strategic buyer, which you'll fall off your chair when you all find out who it is. And the time comes, that'll obviously becomes material. We'll, of course, disclose that. But we are at that point that Dan and I have been at before, which is to be able to return a great yield for all of us. Remember, we are significant shareholders, the two of us. This isn't that we're just paid management, hired guns. We put a lot of money in this ourselves. And so, I think, and also, people say, oh, why aren't you putting pictures? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we've never done things like a junior. We don't need to put pictures. I don't want to inflame NGOs. I don't want to start, having people saying their dogs are upset because they can hear a hammer. I just want to go about my business discreetly and then basically declare victory. And I think that's very important to understand who I am and how we operate this company. Panasqueira, we're into level 4. We front run the government's contributions and we got in. So I think pictures are either already up the website or will be shortly. And I think that's very good. US Department of Commerce, as you all know, has come. they're now in an election cycle, but the EU has picked up the slack because obviously the EU has realized that they're not going to be able to develop any new mines because none of the member states are going to support it. So they pivoted to the existing mines. And can you expand? And we said, well, yes, we can. So they've already been to sites. This will continue. I would imagine that during this year, significant progress will be made into level 4, which is very good. More equipment at Samdong. Well, it's there's going to be stuff arriving into there. I'm now looking for autonomous equipment for underground because I've got the opportunity of significant subsidy support from the Korean government for that program. Low maturity, all of my debt has now been pushed out. I think I said this last time actually, but it's all been put out. So our balance sheet is looking pretty good. The moly, it's more advanced than this. We have definitely something in mind, and we will really want that to contribute to our value, our book value and our stock value during this year. So this is important. And the 6th drawdown has been done, and the 7th drawdown is now, the paperwork is now underway. Samdong. She's big. That's all I think I have to say here. There's nothing quite like it. And I think it's also important to point out, going back to the fact that we're a junior who has always done things a little differently. We spent and still spend, we spent 4 years to date, and we continue working on our process in 2 pilot plants, one in Korea and one in Porto, in northern Portugal. I don't believe you can ever test a process enough. I want to know that when we flip that switch, this thing works. I don't want to be the guy that waits until the 20th of December to cover my house in fairy lights for Christmas, flick the switch and they don't work. I want to start in October. I want to make sure every bulb is working, that when I turn that switch on, I know exactly what's going to happen. And even though I drive my guys nuts who are saying, yeah, but we've got this enormous performance guarantee from Metso and they've had to deposit, $10 million as a bond to underwrite it. I said, doesn't matter. We keep working on this day in, day out. It's really important. We want no surprises when we switch this on. And I think that also underpins the fact that we've had the luxury of time. We've taken a lot of abuse from a lot of people. Why aren't you quicker? Why aren't you doing this? Oh, there must be a problem. No, we've done this correctly. We are building something that is going to sustain for more than 90 years. That means there's a very good chance if we stay in this with a partner or not a partner, however we do it, it's going to outlive us and our kids. Well, maybe not our kids, but it's a vast deposit like Portugal. And I think that's very important to remember, that we've taken our time to finish this. And I think that's key to a successful mine opening, as well as the fact that we've discovered all kinds of things in mine development. Our mine development concludes in September. Phase 1 is finished in September, which is significantly ahead of schedule. And I'm going to ease straight into phase 2. Phase 2 is where we expand to 1.2 million tons. So there'll be no break. What we have found, though, is that I've got a lot more ore and a lot more grade than our block model suggested. 2, I've run out of space on surface to store ore. It's everywhere. I don't know what to do with it. And I think the learning curve that we've had has meant we've really got a very good understanding of underground. But again, no surprises when we flip the switch. I think our offtake is well spoken about. KfW, the loan that a junior should never be able to get. We got it. We got it because KfW, it took a while, but they looked at it and they said, you know what? I think you guys know what you're doing. And I think that was very important. And of course, OAKB have been an incredibly supportive partner as well in terms of issuing the ECA guarantee. It's a big deposit. I don't have to talk about this. It's vast. It's what's interesting about this deposit, which I've always said, is that if geopolitics becomes such an issue, the worst thing happens. I don't know. China decides they're going to restrict the amount of tungsten available. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but you never know. When you have a one-stop shop, you never know what can happen in the future. The way that this deposit is laid out is not to the point of depth, but basically it's extension. And so you could theoretically put in multiple portals in here to dramatically increase your output if the world got to that point where it had to happen. And I think that makes it also quite unique. You're not determined on a vertical deposit, it's a horizontal deposit. And I think, you know, even the parties that you know, we talk to in Korea or talking to us, this is very much in the back of their minds. This project can provide a great solution in the worst case scenario. These are the milestones, and where we're going to put this up. So just everyone be calm. It'll all make sense shortly. The downstream, well, it's coming along nicely. The engineering group is going out there in March, who's working on this. A location has been identified that the government is local government is assisting us with us. It will be in our region of Youngwol County. And I think that we have enough space in the site that's been proposed to us to expand if so necessary. And the moly, as I said, we will work on that this year. This will add to our value when the work is finished because it's important. It's become, with its pricing and its supply issue, more and more important to us. I think that, again, this will be published. I've got to finish up because I've got 3 minutes until, you know, questions. But this deposit, I think, will be quite unique, and it's the cost efficiency of getting in there that's so important. And I think that's really why it's very attractive to certain consumers, domestic consumers in Korea. And again, it's a vast deposit. We have a great deal of inferred information from the historical data. What we essentially now have to do is move a bulk of that into measured and indicated to then start attributing real value to this. Panascara, she's still going. Basically, level 4 will give us another 30 to 40 years, which I think is a fair assessment given the performance of the other levels. We won't pass any more tonnage. That doesn't require any further infrastructure on surface. We have to extend the shaft by some meters, but nothing dramatically complex. And because we are targeting a higher grade, because level 3 has only 20 years left, so we traditionally find in these levels, as you get to the last throes of it, the grade starts to decline. But if we access level 4 earlier, we're going a decade earlier than we intended to. That's just naturally the grade and passing the same tonnage will give us roughly 40% increase in output. And of course, an increased margin, which is important. And if it's subsidized by government, it enables us to look at this 10 years earlier than we would have. Listen, I know everyone says they've got the best. I don't care. This material is unlike anything else available. That's why we're able to get significantly above market for it. That's the telltale sign. If someone else has a better material, but they can't get over market, then it's not as good as this. And this material is very much coveted by all of the consumers. Oh, this is the visit. I think we've done this before, but the guys wanted me to put their picture up again because, well, you know, they were very happy. It was a very big moment to have the US government come to site. It meant something to the whole team, and as it should. And as I said, the existing infrastructure will be used for level 4. That's not an issue at all. Reserves, we got plenty, and so we're ready to basically be prepared for whatever the future brings regarding any geopolitical risk, and to adhere to stuff like in the DoD in the US, they really do require transparent sources for their munitions. And so I think that's going to be very positive. Corporates, again, our forecasts are unchanged since the last presentation. ESG, well, we have to work with the EU. So, you know, EU, KfW, and even the EU look at subsidies for the mine means that we have to operate at the highest levels. And that's really the end of it. Right, that's it. Matthias, I'm ready for questions, if there are any.
All right. So the first question comes from Tom. Why is the income from mining operations only 5.5% of revenue after 9 months, even while tungsten is so pricey now? And will that get better?
Firstly, because we actually reinvest most of the profit back into the mine to develop level 4. I want to keep that right on track. I don't want to, wait for government to, because government's going to take some time. I'm going into level 4. We made that commitment. And I think that as government subsidy comes online, you will see that improve. But remember, Panasquera, she's 136 years old. She's not a profit center. We're a development company which happens to have the best tungsten university in the world, which is Panasquera, a Portuguese mine. It pays its own way. It contributes a small amount of earnings into corporate, but obviously opening level 4, that will have a much stronger impact on our balance sheet. Tess?
Yes.
Still with me?
I'm still with you. I'm reading blocks of text where people appreciate you as a as a CEO. So maybe you can read that after your presentation.
Well, I'd like to thank all my family that have come to this. My mom and my sister. It's very kind of them.
Here's another question from Hans. How much money will you need for level 4 in Portugal?
It's a loaded question because there's a way of doing it ourselves and there's a way of doing it with government. I would say that, from start to finish, we're going to, with the government, use approximately 50 million euros, thereabouts. But within that, there are all kinds of ways that we can trim it back if need be. Because, when you ask a whole bunch of engineers for costings, they start flicking through new machine, new equipment catalogs. They go to town, as they should. But I think that the cap is 50 million. The floor is probably close to 30, 35 million. So it's in between that range. But because this is a sheet metal, because this is we're developing 10 years earlier than we intended, we do expect quite significant support from the government, from either the US or the EU.
Okay. And what's causing the delay of 2 Qs for starting active mining in Shandong in comparison to the last investors presentation? And what causes the adjustment forecasts?
It's been no delay, and I just haven't put pictures. But as I said, underground development.
I'm just repeating the questions here, but okay.
That's right, Matthias. I didn't take it personally. The underground development is actually ahead of schedule and is due to complete in September of this year, which is a huge milestone. So mining has absolutely continued.
Okay. And how often are you at Shandong, and is everything really moving in going to schedule as it's seen in your eyes, by yours?
Well, it's the same sort of question. I go to Korea on a regular basis. I live in a perpetual state of jet lag. I am satisfied and the bank is satisfied with progress. I think you just have to remember what we're doing here. So we're building in a jurisdiction like most democracies, where you have to go very carefully, discreetly, and cautiously. And I think that's also an enormous value add to anyone who has a mine right now in a transparent jurisdiction. Australia is unique, but in any other jurisdiction, building is all but impossible. We've done it. We're doing it. Bear with me. There's all a reason for being discreet in our approach. If the bank is happy, everyone else should be happy. And me as one of the largest shareholders by a long way, if I'm happy, you should feel comfortable to be happy too.
Good. I mean, there are also a lot of positive views on you. So in the chat. So I think most people are happy, but are also
I understand.
worried.
Everybody wants things done by tomorrow, but China achieved their supply chain dominance over a generation, 30 years. Yeah. We're not building a fly-by-night mine here. We're building a mine that all of you are going to expect it to work as soon as we switch it on. And that's what I'm going to deliver.
Excellent. So that were fantastic closing words because the time's already up.
Great. Thanks, Matthias.